So, as you know, today's the next to last gathering we're going to have as a group. We could do our final class on Thursday. And what I want to do today is I want to start working on helping you get prepared for doing your thesis. And so that it is important that you demonstrate in your thesis that you've been familiar with what's being said in the class and in the readings that have been assigned to demonstrate a fluidity or a fluency with the content of the course. But it is important that you say something, that you take a position. That what I'm going to be doing today and on Thursday is pointing out that what it is I sort of want you to do in the paper. That we're developing your thesis about what is to be done. What is to be done about what it is that we've come to understand during the course. And that we've done a dozen different things in the course. So far, we set forth for you and gave you the opportunity to familiarize yourself with and to talk to the issue of global climate change, to understand what the science behind it is, what the projections are that are being projected by the scientific community, what the official findings are of the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, what the findings have been of a major interagency study that's been done by over a dozen separate departments, executive departments in the United States government. So you're familiar with what the projections are of what is going to happen unless there is some sort of radical intervention in the present rate of emitting global greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. We've also, in the course, revealed to you the fact that the major oil and gas corporations and coal corporations have in fact known since the mid-70s, at least, that they were doing this, that their product, the burning of their product and the release of the gases generated by the combustion of their products into the atmosphere are in fact wreaking havoc on the climate system of our planet. They've known this, and not only did they conceal it, but that they've gone to taking very active measures to distort the information that is being developed by the scientific community trying to warn people about this, and that they've hired full-scale public relations firms. In fact, many of the same firms that were hired by the tobacco industry to mislead the American people about the cancer-causing qualities of smoking. So we've become aware of that so that we know that there is a degree of scienter or actual illegal intent in deceptive and corrupt intent on the part of the leadership, the owners and management of the oil corporations and the fossil fuel corporations to not only go forward with inflicting this type of damage on the climate system of our planet, but to also deceive the people about it and to therefore willingly inflict the consequences of global climate change on the people of the world, including our own citizens, in exchange for their short-term profits. We've also pointed out in detail, given you access to the readings that reveal to you that the response on the part of both major political parties, the Republican Party, of course, but the Democratic Party as well, the complete insufficiency of their historical response to the information, even as it's being put forth by the scientific community to try to overcome this aggressive campaign funded by tens of millions of dollars a year by the oil and fossil fuel corporations to deceive the people about this. That the Republican Party, of course, has become embedded in this denial of even any significant contribution to the global climate change problem on the part of the fossil fuel industry. And the Democratic Party has been making these kind of limpid proposals, asserting that maybe we should reduce by some 33% the annual rate of global greenhouse gas emissions below the standards of 2000, which is dramatically insufficient because the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of the United Nations has indicated that we have to reduce the global greenhouse gas emissions by 70% below those levels, and that we need to do so by 2025, not 2035. That is being proposed by the Democratic Party. And this was under Obama and the Hillary Clinton Secretary of State administration. So we've demonstrated to you, and the readings have made clear to you, the insufficiency of the response of either of the two major Democratic parties. And we've also made it clear that the Trump administration is not only engaged in denying the consequences of the theretofore levels of global greenhouse gas emissions, but that they've in fact doubled down on it, in fact tripled down on it. That they've undertaken a major program to triple the actual output of petroleum and fossil fuels in North America to allegedly at the beginning of it to address a domestic energy crisis, purportedly. Not wanting us to be dependent on foreign oil for our energy supplies, but then very quickly moved to the position of making clear that in light of the fact that it had been revealed that virtually all of this new oil production was going to be sold on the international market and not in fact made available to the people of the United States at all, they moved very quickly to the position that they were attempting to make the United States, that is the private oil and petroleum corporations and fossil fuel corporations, the dominant energy producing country in the world. And so that they've dramatically exacerbated the problems. And we've also detailed the fact that the impeachment process, which is underway now. Yes?
There's something that's worth saying, not only American oil companies, but also the Canadian oil company with the Keystone XL pipeline, because that's not even American.
No, that's true. But the fact is that the Trump administration has made rulings that now make it feasible for the Canadian Oil Corporation to transport all that oil down through the Keystone XL pipeline. So the American policy positions have in fact exacerbated that because the Canadian government has purchased that corporation, pulling it out of the potential debit doldrums, and has actually begun to coordinate with the Trump administration to get it transported, mined and transported. So we've also, as I mentioned, we've demonstrated the insufficiency of the impeachment process that is underway right now to even address this issue. The fact that the Trump administration is basically knowingly and willfully killing the planet, destroying the climactic system, with all of the attendant consequences that we've talked about, and that are doing so knowingly and willfully. And yet, nobody is even discussing the fact that that failure to protect the citizens of our country and to protect our national security against global climate change is a complete breach of his oath of office, just as much as his directly cooperating with Russia in interfering in the election. That you do not hear yet the actual drumbeat coming that if in fact it can be demonstrated that he in fact did cooperate and his campaign cooperated with Russia in getting him elected and are cooperating in lifting the restrictions on Russia so they can develop this oil under the Arctic shelf, that even those things are not being talked about as a grounds for impeaching him. They've basically shied away from that entirely, and they're focusing exclusively on the issues of obstructing justice. Now we're aware of that, and that we've also demonstrated the paralysis on the part of the Democratic Party, the present Democratic Party, to even effectively go forward with the impeachment of this guy. They're still all shuffling around from foot to foot and saying that what we really need to do is we need to just conduct investigations and not do so under the rubric of impeachment, but just doing oversight on the president in the executive branch. And because of that, they've run into this wall now of the administration just stonewalling them, refusing to comport with any of the subpoenas. And what they're doing is, rather than directly holding them in contempt, what they're doing is saying, oh yeah, we're going to litigate. We're going to file a lawsuit against you, and not move to hold you in contempt and send the marshals to arrest you and put you in jail, like what they would do to normal citizens if they were in contempt of Congress. But instead, we're going to litigate. We're going to go directly to the court system that the administration is now packing with some 236 new federal judges, and depend upon them. And so that the present Democratic Party leadership is itself failing in the face of this kind of rigid position that's being taken by the Trump administration to really redress the flagrant disregard of the duty that the administration has to protect our people. And we've also touched upon the inadequacy of the existent judicial system through litigation in the context of the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Keystone XL Pipeline, the insufficiency of the judicial system to really provide a permanent solution to this, to really stop the building of these pipelines, even though they know that they're in flagrant disregard of the environmental protection laws. That, as was demonstrated in the Dakota Access case, Judge Boasberg in Washington, D.C., who, as I mentioned, is a member of the William Bennett Williams Legal Lodge, which is a private fraternity of white male lawyers who defend corporate criminals. And he still remains a member of that lodge, even while he's on the bench. And he demonstrates that type of bias in his opinions. And everybody considers that just the normal course of things. And so that the judicial system is not demonstrating any kind of willingness to protect us, even though we've gone to great lengths in establishing such a judicial system and purportedly set up a system for picking independent judges. It's clearly not working right now. But most importantly, I think, that we have revealed during the course the fact that we're not dealing with simply inside our body politic a group of conservative believers, and we're not dealing with just people who are simply business oriented or business interested, but indeed we're dealing with an elite set of Caucasian, male, racist, misogynist, imperialists who are in fact dedicated to not only trying to allegedly protect us against some major international global power like the Soviet Union that they keep pretending for 75 years was going to be taking over the whole world. Even in the face of the withdrawal of the Soviet Union from any type of a dialectical confrontation, they move forward immediately into trying to be clear about the fact, at least inside their secret documents, that their real objective is to be committed politically, economically, socially, and even militarily to maintaining their continued privileged access to the strategic raw materials deemed by them to be needed by either A, our American corporations, or B, the corporations of the member states of some new Northern Industrial Alliance, which not coincidentally seem to be made up of all Caucasian countries. That we've seen that this effort is arrayed against a new Asian empire led by China, and that the purpose of their attempt to reach out now to Russia to become partners with the United States in their terms securing the ongoing security of our access to energy resources on behalf of Western civilization or the Western nations. And they've now invited Russia to come in to become no longer a member of the East at all. They're actually into changing the geographic alignment of countries, that Russia is, in their view, no longer part of the Eastern Bloc. They are, in fact, part of Western civilization, now that they have spun off all of their ethnic provinces, suggesting that it's not East or West, or indeed North or South, that is the determining factor. It's race. And that it's because of them having spun off their non-Caucasian republics that they now are in a position to be invited in to become what was referred to as the partners, the new intimate partners of the United States in preserving the security of Western access to the oil reserves. And that these oil reserves are in turn viewed as being essential to the engineing of their military machine that provides all the fuel for their rockets, for their jet fighters, for their strategic bombers, for their tanks and armored personnel carriers, for their destroyers, and for, in fact, most of their aircraft carriers, with the exception of a couple of the nuclear-powered aircraft carriers and their nuclear submarines. And even in that regard, the latter nuclear-powered vessels, they're actually now recommending the attempt to supplement their monopoly power over the oil and petroleum with increasing potentially the building of new nuclear power facilities, which have the advantage of generating waste materials that generate plutonium that they need for engineering their nuclear war machine. So this is what we have discovered in the course to date, and that we've discovered that there is going on inside the national security state apparatus just this argument going on between whether or not this effort to maintain our continued privileged access to the strategic raw materials of the world is supposed to be undertaken on behalf of just the United States unilaterally for the benefit of our corporations to keep us the sole superpower on the planet, or whether or not, B, they're willing to share this endeavor with the other Caucasian nations of Western civilization, now including Russia. And we've noted that explains this peculiar outreach to Putin on the part of Trump, that all of the major pundits and news media and political officials all seem to be standing kind of amazed and baffled and befuddled by why it is that Trump would be reaching out to Putin and to Russia the way that he is. And yet they know perfectly well that this national security document exists, the second iteration of the United States Defense Department policy planning guidance document that was drafted in 1992, right at the end of the Cold War, expressly recommending that we reach out to Russia and invite them into this new Northern Industrial Alliance for the specific purpose of maintaining our continued privileged access to the strategic raw materials needed by members of this new Northern Industrial Alliance. So that we see that all of this is going on, and so therefore the would-be contest that is upcoming in 2020 between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party would be primarily between these two factions. The Trump-dominated Republican Party arguing that we ought to have America first, that make America great again. Let's have America, the United States, be the sole superpower on the planet, and let's do everything to increase our dominance over the world, versus the new, more moderate, post-Cold War Democratic Party, the Democratic Leadership Conference of Richard Gebhardt and Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and Joe Biden. That what they're really proposing is a multilateral Caucasian alliance to basically prepare for this upcoming confrontation with China, the new Asian empire, the thesis for which is elucidated in excruciating and embarrassing detail in the book, the book that is the Clash of Civilizations and the remaking of world order that we referred you to. So that this is now up in front of us, and those seem to be the probable parties engaged in this pseudo-election coming up in 2020, except that there is now on the scene a new group, a new force. It seems to be a genuinely progressive coalition of predominantly young people, people from the millennial generation, your generation, that has been pushing forward new candidates. The paradigmatic example of which is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but the other members of the freshman class of new members of the House of Representatives that have come in, and interestingly enough, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, two kind of war horses from the baby boomer generation, and that they are basically decrying the inadequacies of both of these groups. And what they've done is they've designed an insurgent campaign as an insurgency inside the Democratic Party to basically run insurgent candidates against longtime Democratic incumbents who are part of this new, more moderate Democratic Party that are basically offering nothing but mealy-mouthed kind of soporifics in the face of global climate change, coming on to destroy your entire future. And fortunately, you're not just standing by taking it. You're saying that you're going to stand up and do something about this and support these new candidates and a new set of policies which are umbrellaed by this Green New Deal that is being talked about. Our office at the Romero Institute is in fact actively engaged in drafting the particulars of the California Green New Deal. We succeeded this past weekend at the Democratic National Conference or State Conference of California in getting an item put into the platform committee for the upcoming Democratic campaign in California and their convention, advocating the enactment of a Green New Deal legislation in the state of California. We've proffered this same thing to the Republican Party. They don't seem to be listening. And so, but the bottom line is there are actions underway now to do something about this. And so that the question that is posed to us here, and the question that I want you to address in your papers is what can be done? What is to be done about this? Obviously, there are a range of options that you have to consider. I'm going to sort of elucidate some of them so that you can reflect upon which one you think is one that you might be supportive of, or any other to respond to this situation. You can also, of course, critique my explication of the elements in the situation that are confronting us at the present time. You can critique any one of them and disagree with them and suggest that the crisis is not of the nature and kind and extent to which I'm suggesting. But if you in fact agree, then the question is what to do about it and what are the range of options that we have. You can, of course, just do more of the same of what's going on. You could write letters to the editor, you can attend public rallies, you can march in marches against global climate change. You can, write letters to your Congress people. You can recycle. You can bicycle short distances. You can, stop eating red meat. You can get a hybrid car instead of a big pig car that people drive around. You can, you can actually give contributions to organizations like the National Resource Defense Committee, or the ACLU, or others. You can go forward and do the sort of couch potato thing that most people are doing, and that many of you may have already been doing, though your disposition is better, but your actual conduct is completely limited so far in many instances. Or you could, in fact, become an activist as a second option. You could actually transition into becoming activists, and you could join Sunrise, for example. You could become an intern at the Romero Institute. You could participate in helping to draft the California Green New Deal. You could actually help organize the Lakota People's Archives to work on those during the summer, and point out, what might be done to help in the organizing against the Keystone Pipeline. I could point out to you that just this past week, since I saw you last, the Lakota people, the new tribal chairman of the Oglala people on the Pine Ridge Reservation, Julian Bear Runner, has been approached, and they're insisting now that he sign an agreement that he's not going to oppose the Keystone XL pipeline. And they're conditioning the flow of water to the tribe from the Missouri River on that. If he will not sign the agreement that he won't oppose the Keystone XL pipeline, they'll cut them off from the supply of water from the Missouri River. Now, the problem with that tactic is they already don't get water from the Missouri River, even though there was a promise that they would, because the administrative group has said that, the pipes that are on your reservation haven't proven yet that they meet the proper standards. And so while the white group of ranchers in cattlemen that wanted to get a system put in piping the water from the Missouri River inland into the state of South Dakota, made an effort to get the federal government to pay for such a pipeline system back in 1988, and were unable to do so. So what they did is they came back in 2002 and they said, well, let's have this for not only the white ranchers and cattlemen and stuff, but for the poor Indian people too. And so they included the native tribes in on it. And they got the heads of the tribal councils to sign an agreement that they wanted the water too. And so all of a sudden, federal funds came flowing in, but then they said, on second thought, we can get all the water into the ranchers, into the cattlemen and stuff, because they have a whole new set of pipes and stuff for transporting the water, but you guys don't. And so we can't give it to you until you prove that your piping system is adequate. So you'll have to continue to get water from the Oglala aquifer, which the federal government, happens to have contaminated with radioactive uranium for the mining. And it turns out that Trump is now getting set to issue an executive order increasing the uranium mining in the Dakotas under his national security authority, on the grounds that the United States only gets 2% of its uranium domestically, and they're dependent on foreign sales of uranium, and he wants to expand the nuclear arsenal of the United States to make America great again. And so he's now using his executive authority to increase the mining of uranium to further contaminate the Oglala aquifer, and the Lakota people are going to be dependent upon that for their source of water. So you can get a sense that time is running out for the Lakota people and other indigenous people of the world to keep depending upon white people to do them any favors. And so that you could become an activist and work in that project, to work with the Lakota people, to help them organize, to defend themselves against the Keystone XL pipeline. You could help them organize to oppose this water project that's going in. Because interestingly enough, the facility that coordinates the distribution of the water to the ranchers and to the cattlemen is on the Pine Ridge Reservation. And they're charged with having to run the center even though they don't get any of the water. And so you might be able to speculate upon what type of options they have if in fact this situation continues. So you could in fact become involved directly with working with indigenous people to try to deal with the oppression that they're suffering from. And so you can participate in that if you'd like, or you could join the National Resource Defense Council itself and become active members of these things rather than just passively send them a few bucks now and then. There's a whole series of things that you could do, or you could in fact become more radical than that, or you could of course quit the whole deal. You know, that I actually had a meeting last week with a very intelligent, very good faith person saying that they're so convinced that the white people aren't going to do anything to stop global climate change because they're caught up in the mythology of the framing of the issues, the limited options they have by having to just vote for the Republicans or Democrats, or just sit back and watch CNN news and have them tell them stuff. That you could start to organize to withdraw from the whole operation and set up an alternative community. That's what this person was saying. You set up an alternative economic and environmental community and start to grow an alternative reality so that when the whole thing falls in, you and your friends will at least have some sort of a retreat to participate in. Or you could, in fact, participate in the takeover effort of the National Democratic Party. As I say, this is actively underway at the present time. There are a lot of old-time pals that'll tell you that this is never going to work because, you know, the Democratic Party depends entirely upon these massive contributions from corporations and rich people, and they aren't going to do anything that's very revolutionary. And so they're going to slow walk the entire operation, and to get you engaged in trying to amend their institutions, which they've created for their own self-interest, is a waste of time, and it's a misdirection of your energy, etc. That's one of the arguments they make. I think that we can talk about this. We're going to be talking about this in just a few moments when I get done sort of laying out what a range of options are that you can busily take notes on and determine whether or not you want to go down one of these paths in your thesis or not. You could also become part of the Green Party. The Green Party's been around for a while, and you could say, well, wait a second, isn't the Green Party the answer? You know, isn't that a good idea? You know, even though, you know, they spend their time nominating people who couldn't even find the washroom in any one of the houses in Congress. You know, people who are like a local school teacher who's a really nice person, but has got no political experience, you know, or they have other people for their candidates. I don't mean to be critical of the Green Party. I just want to criticize them because I don't think that they're being realistic. They're not actually putting forth candidates that have a realistic ability to win. And the problem is they don't even intend to win most of the time. They're there to make a point. They're there to try to get the Democratic candidates to move a little bit further to a little bit less to the right of center. You know, but it's not a winning strategy. Same thing is true of the Natural Law Party. The Natural Law Party took a run at this for a while, and they had actually, they qualified in all 50 states to run candidates. They had great candidates. They were a terrific party. You know, I went and met with them actually out in Fairfield, out in Iowa, at their big transcendental meditation college they've got out there. The Maharishi University. This is a big TM group, is what they are. They were transcendental meditating people and had a great line of what to do, had a great fundamental ideas about what could be done. But it turns out they viewed the whole thing as a siddha. You know, that it was just a kind of a little spiritual exercise to show that they could do it, to try to become involved. But it was a great idea. The Natural Law Party you can look to see them. So one of the things you might want to consider doing is looking at the Natural Law Party and seeing if it could be revived, if that's what you think could work. You could become a member of the Libertarian Party. Maybe there's some libertarian solutions to this. Or you could talk about having a classic independent party, for all this growing number of people who are independents, because they've somehow grokked the fact that neither one of the regular parties is going to do squat for them. And so that they've said, I'm an independent. So if anybody asks them, they don't want to be subject to the attacks on either party. And so they say, I'm an independent. And then when you ask them what their policies are, their independent policies, they don't have the foggiest idea of what they're going to be doing. So there is that option if you want to do that. Or there's one that we probably aren't going to have time in this course to do. But for those of you who aren't graduating seniors, we can get at it next spring. There could be, in fact, 8 separate political parties. There could be 8 political parties, each one representing one of the systematic alternative human worldviews. This is a whole realm of study in comparative social ethics, and it has to do with studies done by sociologists to determine that the human family, when confronted by a particular public policy problem, historically divides itself into basically, they start out by talking about 5 basic different groups, right marginalists, left marginalists, right middle marginalists, or right, what do they call them? Right systematists and left systematists, and right marginalists and left marginalists and middle marginalists of all things. But it's expanded now to understanding that there's basically 8 different systematic, thoroughly integrated worldviews. And it might be refreshing to actually have a political party that elucidates an entire set of solutions and responses to public policy problems rooted in a systematic and internally self-referentially consistent worldview that having to do with cosmology and the teleology, the unfolding of the universe, the ontology, the ontological theories of how human consciousness arose, and the epistemological theories of how we go about. I'm seeing putting people to sleep. I'll stop on that. But there is this option of having 8 political parties, each dedicated to a particular worldview, and at which point it would generate something akin to a parliamentary system. There would, by necessity, have to be a coalition of people that would gather together from these political parties. You elect 435 congressional people, and they come from 8 different political parties, and they each have their own caucus. And in order to get a piece of legislation passed, you'd have to assemble a majority of them. Now, what the shortcomings of that are is that it doesn't allow you to become a major imperial power, which is a drawback for some people. Because you can't basically mount an ongoing systematic strategic program to help establish your control over the economic resources of the world if you're constantly contingent upon having to get this coalition put together for every one of your policy decisions. Now, other people might view that as a good thing, but that's again another one of the alternatives. So that there are a range of things, or you could become even more radical. And you could, in fact, decide to become an anti-global climate change revolutionary. There are those options around. There's a group called Earth First, which has started a little bit down that line. Earth First are the people that I mentioned to you that go out and take down ski jumps when they're in the process of building them. They actually engage in direct, aggressive, anti-material activity to try to disrupt the occupying forces of the state. You could join the Extinction Rebellion, a little lesser demonstration of that, of people who've decided they have to go sit down in the middle of highways or sit on bridges and occupy places and are willing to do things to break the law to attract attention to themselves. You could create some kind of a weather underground operation. The Weather Underground was a group that took more seriously than most the need to stop the war in Vietnam, and they engaged in a whole range of unlawful activities that put them high on the list of the FBI in the COINTEL program. You could, in fact, do something like the Tupamaro I'm just throwing out things for you to take a look at for your papers here. There's a group called the Tipamaro that was this fabulous group, I might reveal my own feelings about it. They were begun by a young woman law student in Uruguay and her boyfriend. And they organized law students and graduate school students at the universities in Uruguay to oppose the fascist government there. And they engaged in all kinds of extraordinarily creative activities, similar to what Greenpeace does, with Greenpeace climbing up on buildings and dropping big banners down and putting their boats out in front of the whaling ships and stuff that Greenpeace did back in their old days before they became this kind of lethargic institution that was more devoted to raising funds than doing actions. There's all kinds of options that you have here. What I'm trying to do is to get you up and engaged in looking at these options. And then there's always the one, of course, of full-scale revolution. And that is the taking unto yourself the responsibility to say that when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people, in this case progressives and utopianists and people who read books, to actually take a position that there's this invasive force, this occupying force of elite capitalists in our country that are basically driving us all to doom and infringing our fundamental rights and threatening our lives and the lives of our progeny. Therefore, you might take the position that it's time to revolt against these people and actually engage in revolutionary warfare against them, the taking up first of all necessary anti-materiel steps to disempower their machinery, or secondly, to actually replace them with some more revolutionary administration. Yes?
Yeah, in our papers, can we take a stance and argue why a certain method wouldn't work, rather than argue something that would work, just argue maybe why becoming part of the Green Party wouldn't work?
Yes, but I want, it's important you can argue that a particular one might not work, but I would like you to proffer something that you think would work. Okay, because it doesn't do that much good. That's just like a half a postmodernist. Oh, this isn't true, that isn't true, and then everybody's sitting around saying, waiting for you to say something. So you can and you should, you can spend some time, because I can tell you that you're not limited to 15 pages. So if you wanted to take each one of them and lay out your arguments pro and con for them and then come to a balance at the end, is perfectly okay with me, that I'm going to read them all and grade them all, so that you're free to write as extensively as you want. And then there's the other one, of course, you could become a complete anarchist. The anarchists, I'm surprised there's actually anarchists around town. There's this is a bike shop or something down by the wharf down there. There are these kids who are anarchists, and they think that's totally cool. Let's just jam the machine. Let's stick a wrench into the war machine. Let's just bring it to a stop. Let's stop them from doing what they're doing in the world. They don't have to pretend to have any kind of solution in mind. I think you could go and knock down each one of the potential options and say none of those are going to work. And be an anarchist, that just stop it from continuing. Or lo and behold, some of you may agree with Trump. You could agree that what Trump is doing is the right thing, that you've thought about it a little harder, and you can really see your way through to seeing how this might work. If he just hangs in there tough, maybe North Korea will give in and stop its rocket program. Maybe China will become totally capitalist and let go of their vision of their own reality. So you're perfectly free to do a deeper analysis of Trump's administration than we may have gotten to in this course, and suggest why you think his solutions may work. Or in fact, you could in fact agree with Samuel Huntington and the book I just mentioned, The Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of the World Order, I would very much recommend to you that book. I mean, even if it's only to stun you into being shocked that anybody would actually write that out and submit it and have it published by the Council on Foreign Relations, in their Foreign Affairs magazine. I mean, it's an astonishing piece of work in which, I pointed out to you, he's recommended that we get away from all of this multiculturalism and get back to being a kind of a white Christian culture dominated by men, and get back to the roots of our earlier time period. Recalling that old famous quote by Ronald Reagan of, what's all this talk about a black problem? I remember when there wasn't any black problem. So that there are a range of these options that are available for you. And I would recommend one more thing that you might want to read. There's a little monograph that was written by Zbigniew Brzezinski back in 1993, or at the end of the beginning of the post-Cold War period, called Out of Control. It's the solution to global turmoil on the eve of the 21st century. And this is an extraordinary piece of writing setting forth the absolute classic liberal worldview. And so that you can almost certainly pull it up on the internet. And it's called Out of Control. It's a global chaos on the eve of the 21st century. And this was a very thoroughgoing, carefully thought out thesis on the part of Zbigniew Brzezinski, the former national security advisor for Jimmy Carter and his liberal administration, proposing that steps be taken to persuade the leaders, government leaders, business leaders, social leaders, entertainers, the thought-forming people of the country, to just undertake a voluntary process of relenting on their pursuit of what he characterized as permissive cornucopia. This pursuit of an ever-increasing access to luxuries and economic advantages, and voluntarily forego this in a way to better address, not solve, but to better address the major social problems of our time, which include global climate change, major economic inequality. He also pointed out nuclear proliferation and potential thermonuclear war, and he also pointed out the issue of DNA engineering and the meddling with the DNA of our human species. He thought that the artificial intelligence, the unregulated development of artificial intelligence that could actually pose an extraordinary and as yet unrecognized, largely, threat to our human family. So there's a whole range of these options, and this does not exhaust them all. I know that from my days as an undergraduate, I used to sit there and wait for the professor to explain all the different options so you didn't have to do any creative thinking. But there's probably other options that you can devise as to what you should do. And I'm not talking about just say what one might do or somebody else could do. I'm trying to figure out what you think you can do, okay? And that this has to do largely with what your major is at the present time, and what you intend to do with it. And it can range from anything from being a teacher, to being an engineer, to being a doctor, a lawyer, anything that you, at least at this point, think you want to do professionally, and explain how it is that type of a career can fit into doing everything that you can possibly do, to stop global climate change and the catastrophe that is being predicted on the part of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So So those are the prompts that I'm sort of giving you here in preparation for the writing of your thesis on this thing. And I'd like you to, you got plenty of time to do this. I'm not going to assign any other reading or anything that you have to do between now and Thursday, but I want you to come back in Thursday, and we've got time to talk about this here today, another 30 minutes or so. But what I want you to do is I want you to start seriously considering what it is that you're going to propose doing about this. It can entail you doing something to try to enlist other people to participate with you. This isn't something you have to just do solely all by yourself. You could, organize a revolutionary army. You could, organize a new political party. You could write a book or do anything about this. Okay, but you can do it with as many people as you want. but I want you to do something that is different than you normally do in writing undergraduate papers, which is just to say something about something and try to do it in a witty way and at least in a manner that can at least be understood by the professor. But I'm asking you to do something more than that. I'm asking you to really dig down deeply and think about what it is that you intend to do, how convinced you are of any of these dozen things that we've done here, because any one or more of these that you're not persuaded by, then it has an influence on what it is that you think is necessary to do. And so that's where I am right now on this. Okay, now your papers come in on the 13th. I'm scheduled to fly to Washington, D.C. on the 14th. So I will gather all your papers up on the 13th, and so it's important that you get them in, so that and you just send them in by email to John. They're right here. Okay, email to that class at Romero Institute. Okay, so get those papers in. I'll have them. John will have them. I'll take them with me to Washington, D.C. We're going into Washington. We're going to be meeting with the heads of the major political public interest groups and religious organizations and stuff in Washington, D.C. to help try to get them on board the Green New Deal legislation for California. We're drafting it now. We have like 100 pages, 94 pages right now, omnibus bill that we have a rough draft of right now. And so we're working away on it. So we're trying to build support on the national level. We're working on the state level first. So tell me what your thoughts are, okay? I can be more directive in the questions, but just tell me where you're at on this right now after this course.
You mean just like ideas for a final paper?
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking about writing about education, how crucial I think that is, because I'm working with this class not really having that much knowledge on global climate change and a lot of the foreign policy stuff going on, so I feel like that's really important to do some type of outreach for people like me who have no idea what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Like education in what kind of context? Institutional context?
I heard something like a nonprofit type of educational platform, which there's people who have the knowledge to give out and go into like public school systems and do some type of outreach for that.
Okay, is that what you're planning to do? Is be a teacher?
Not necessarily at the moment. I mean, not at the spot where I want to be.
But public education type of teacher. Okay. All right. So what else? Who else has got some ideas already as to what they? I'm not going to hold you to it. I'm just trying to have you help get other people in the class thinking about what kind of way this could be done. Yes.
I was going to write about a revolution.
Okay. In a revolution knocks down the state, or a revolution that replaces the state, or what?
A revolution that, I guess pretty much a regime change within the United States. So that replaces the government with what I think is a better form of governance of a parliamentary system.
Okay, a parliamentary revolution. This would, see, interestingly, as you know, the Constitution itself doesn't actually address the issue of political parties. There was little anticipation at the beginning on the part of the drafters of the Constitution that these political parties would arise. But in the context of the writing of the Constitution, these two groups, as I've referred to as the Hamiltonians, that Alexander Hamilton represented as a lawyer the financial and mercantile interests in the colonies, and then this other group that were really the Madisonians, that were very much into trying to have things locally controlled, not have any kind of a centralized government authority over them, and to leave most of the decision-making in the hands of the colonies and the people there. And that those tended to ossify into the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, which then degenerated into the Federalists and the Democratic Republican Party, interestingly enough, and then it became the Republican Party. And so that this issue of the replacing of or supplementing of the two major political parties by a third party, or an insurrectionist movement inside one of the parties or both of the parties, are avenues that you could pursue in that. In the assertion on the part of Bernie Sanders' campaign that this is the Bernie revolution is it's a revolution with a small r, I would say. That he's obviously not calling for revolution. He's calling for potentially revolutionary changes within the system. And that's a more moderate offering. But you can address it along the spectrum anywhere with a certain revolutionary zeal, I would say. Okay. So what else are people thinking about?
I'm thinking about, I guess a theme would be like alienation. I think that's really strong because you get this whole relationship between people, and it's very divisive. And I think that's something that really separates people from joining either a political movement that understands climate change from a political movement that doesn't understand or refuses it. Mm-hmm. So I think when you have enormous amounts of alienation, you have people that are simply uneducated and they don't know which side to choose, so they're forced to simply choose what they know, mm-hmm. or who they know. Uh-huh. So I think it's at least listening so far to the other topics. That's something that I want to talk about in my own paper, at least address.
Okay, there's a lot written on this issue of the alienation of the mostly the writings on the alienation of the white male, lower working class people, that the pundits and the sociologists seem to be attributing the victory of Trump to. But there's really, you can actually look at some 70,000 people in the three key states, of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, and say, well, this is where they were who made the decision. And in fact, there were 3 million more people that voted for Hillary Clinton than he. So that this ability to focus on the alienation that you're talking about, it would be helpful if you could focus on, who you believe are the ones that are alienated and how it manifested in a way that makes a proximate difference.
Okay. Well, I think one of them that really came to mind was an example of going green, kind of technology, that sort of thing. You have people in third world countries that are limited, when using gas and coal sort of things, and there's this kind of elitist narrative to put them on electricity and like solar panels or whatever, but those things are just so expensive, you know, so that's an angle that I kind of wanted to take as well. Like simply like classism has separated like so many people from like reaching these like green sort of like technologies as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, one of the things you want to be careful of, and I noted it in a few of the papers, is that you have to be careful about raising a number of different issues, each of which is interesting and could really be explored, but just kind of tossing out 2 or 3 of them and not ever really explaining what the relationship is between them and not going in as deeply as you can on any given one of them. So that you have to be careful, because you know it ends up then you get done reading the paper and you're going, I'm not sure what the relationship among these things are. Or if you're going to point them out, you can point out what the relationships are and then talk about the relationships and what that means. Okay? All right. Yes. What do you think?
Ideally, I would like to deconstruct and rebuild capitalism in an attempt to follow FDR's Union of the Address, in which we need to, the Constitution doesn't support the right to economic independence and freedom, and in doing that, we can shift from fossil fuels and all that to actually renewable energy, and I see that best happening by reconstructing capitalism and the economic system in the United States.
All right. Well, it's really a logical topic, because you know, to the extent to which people are referencing the meme of the New Deal, to actually look back at the New Deal itself and see exactly what the component elements of it were. And as you know, that one of the more common observations that are made about it is that despite the fact that the capitalist class was furious with Franklin Roosevelt and even went to the point of trying to overthrow him in 1934, the fact of the matter is that he saved their butt. And there would have been a much more radical kind of socialist type of solution if he hadn't stepped in and salvaged the capitalist system. And so that the revisiting of that, there's a let me help you out. There's a theme that could help here. There's a book that I've mentioned it just in passing in the course. It's called Generations: A History of America's Future, and it's written by a fellow named Strauss and another fellow named Howe. Strauss and Howe wrote this book. And they talk about the fact that there are a number of issues in the book, but that in every 100-year period, there are basically 4 distinct generations. And they range from anywhere from 20 to 25 years, each of them, and that they play a distinctive role relative to each other. And that every single 100-year period, not marked by 1900 to 2000 or on the button like that, but different, usually defined by major social events that take place. And that every 100 years there's the rise of these 4 generations. And one of these generations is an idealist generation. Another one is a reactive generation. Another one is a civic generation. And the 4th one is what they call an adaptive generation. You guys are the civic generation of the 21st century. And the civic generation is charged with addressing the major secular crisis of that 100-year period, which in this case is global climate change for your generation. And they, in fact, do this usually in alliance with the idealist generation of that same 100-year period. That's us. That's the boomers. See them all hanging out here in the back here, ready to support you guys. And that there is a thing that they point out, and that is that the civic generation, in coordination with the idealist generation, look to the ideals of the culture and see how the previous civic generation in the previous 100-year cycle, that would be for the 20th century, and that was the World War II generation. The group they're all going to be celebrating here in the next couple days, throwing themselves on Omaha Beach and, getting slaughtered in front of the 50 calibers. That whole generation, that was the civic generation that was dealing at that point with the major crisis of capitalism. And it had imposed this massive depression on the world, and that the way that capitalism was attempting to manifest itself was in the form of the fascist regime of Germany and Japan and Italy under Mussolini, and that it had gotten forward-leaning out over its skis and had generated this massive world war, and that therefore the crisis, the secular crisis of that 20th century was the crisis of capitalism. And so therefore the Franklin Roosevelt administration coming forward to address that, he was a member of the civic generation of the 20th century. And that the idealist generation of the 20th century had been the progressives of the Chautauqua movement, actually, from the early 20th century. And so that the solution, and one of the things that's pointed out is that the reason that each 100-year period has the resurgence of a new major secular crisis is usually because the previous civic generation did not really solve the problem. What they did is they struck a compromise, because they were the ones faced in real life with the consequences of the crisis, and they had to solve it. They couldn't just sit around twiddling their thumbs like the idealists, who are throwing out all these kind of big idealistic things and not necessarily putting an adequate shoulder to the wheel. Okay, so that this revisiting of the continuing imperfections of the capitalist system that have generated the global climate crisis is a very important theme to pick up on and to try to figure out whether a deeper solution to this can be found. Okay? All right. So what else? Because I'm going to try to be as helpful as I can in like additional readings and stuff that you guys might do in preparation for your paper, so that it flows out of what it is you really want to do. Okay? So there must be lots of. I'll just throw that on the floor if it gets in the way. But you just think of some things that you're entertaining. You don't have to be wedded to it, but just tell me what your thoughts are at this stage. Yes.
Sorry, all the way back here.
That's okay. That's why I usually get you guys to come up. But yes.
I was planning on writing about the evolution of manifest destiny.
Huh?
I was planning on writing about the evolution of manifest.
No, I heard you. Yes, I'm just going, aha.
And theoretically, how that's the foundation of American imperialism and this global empire within the corporate sector. And what I was going to tie is political facets, economic facets, and then social repercussions. So how the government has been tied with private entities, and at that point how social norms have changed, education has changed, and how societies, and American society in general, and other regions and sovereign nations as well, have suffered because of political and economic forces.
Okay, I would recommend a thing for you to take a look at. There is an article that I think I've got a copy of it actually here. There's an article that was. You got your notes? His name is Nafeez, N-A-F-E-E-Z, Ahmed, A-H-M-E-D. And it's called How the Trump Regime Was Manufactured by a War inside the deep state. Now this is put out by a thing called Insurge Intelligence. It's extraordinarily intelligent piece of work, and it touches on the very issue you're talking about, that the people who are behind Trump, and this gets down into the deep analysis of who all these different factions are that are behind Trump, talks about this issue of their belief is that the global climate problem that's being caused, the attack on the resources and all that, is because of all the non-white people. And that it's they're overpopulating and they're coming into our country, and they're sitting on our resources, different parts of the world, etc. And it's a sophisticated understanding of this concept of manifest destiny, because the manifest destiny operates. It's an immediate partner of the white man's burden as it manifested itself. Okay, and that you'll find that article to be helpful, I think, to you.
Can I add a quick little thing to that too? There's also the doctrine of discovery, which might be an interesting avenue of actually changing the roots of manifest destiny in a real way.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You'll want to look that one up too. That manifest destiny is directly linked to this issue of the doctrine of discovery, in which the Catholic Church. Yes.
Well, I was going to tie it on, it's Francisco, I forget this is his last name, but I was going to tie how it's more originated from divine law.
Yes, that's the one. That's the divine law. That's the doctrine of discovery. That was issued by Pope Alexander VI, back in 1893. Yep, 1493. That's right. There were actually two of them, but that's. Yeah, well, actually, there was three. That he did two of them, and then the later pope did one. So there's a whole set of them. That divine origins of the theoretical superiority of the Catholic Christian white people is important. Okay, that's a good one. Okay. See now, how's your level of thinking going here? We've got another 10 minutes or so. So I'll start calling it. What are your thoughts so far?
I don't really know if this counts, but I was going to do voting because, honestly, I have never voted before. So I feel like that would be the thing to do, especially for myself. And I know a lot of people don't vote, so that was my thought. Okay,
now you might take up a supplement to that, and that is that the one of the reasons why people are not as interested in voting is because they don't think they have adequate choices. Okay, so that there are two major things going on in that area. One is their attempt to suppress access to the ballot for the people that the reactionaries think are going to vote against them, which has to do not only with black people, Hispanic people, but young people. And so that, for example, right now you see an example of it. There is now, just as you guys are getting set to leave for summer vacation, the conservatives on the city council here have decided that they're going to undertake a recall petition against 2 of the 4 progressives that got elected the last election, largely with the vote of the students. Okay? And so what they're doing is they're laying in wait for you guys to go away on your summer vacation, and they're mounting this recall petition to try to get rid of 2 of the progressives in the 4-person majority now in the city council. So that effort to suppress the vote of the people who are more progressive, I'll point out in all fairness, it isn't just the reactionaries that do this. The fact is there's a great history, or an ignoble history, of Republicans and Democrats alike doing this. Trying to identify who the voters are that might vote against them and doing whatever they can to keep them from voting. to the point of sending out false notices as to what the day of the elections are. There's a lot of that stuff that goes on. And another one, like for example, in New York, when I first went down to the big law firm on Wall Street out of law school, that I discovered that the voter registration office was open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day, Monday through Friday, right when working people were all working. And it turns out that it was run by the Democratic Party machine because they didn't want more voters, because they'd figured out a way to assert control over those voters they had. They knew where they were, they had their addresses and phone numbers, and they could mobilize those people. And so they really didn't want more people. And so that when we wanted to start registering new people to vote, young people to vote, black people to vote, Hispanic people to vote, the Puerto Rican people to vote, that they refused to allow us to have what we call a mobile voter registration. And so we sued them. I sued them. And we won in the federal court there. And the federal court entered an injunction ordering them to allow us to do mobile voter registration. So what we did is we went up, we got the Isley brothers, and we got the Yankee Stadium, and we invited everybody to come for free to a concert of the Isley brothers. And they, as their admissions, they had to register to vote. And so we did. Then we rented Madison Square Garden. And we got Simon and Garfunkel to come back together again, and people whom you never heard of, Mike Nichols and Elaine May, to come together. And we had a big thing called Together Again, and we did the same thing. And we broke all the records in the history of New York in registering new voters. So this issue of you wanting to vote, you want to take a look at this issue of the effort to suppress votes that both political parties do, and what can be done about that, and perhaps relate to it what it is, what role you might play other than just voting this time, which is great, but what you might do to participate in assisting other people in getting registered to vote. Okay, because that's going to be very important this time in mobilizing people to vote. Your generation is going to be the determining group of people who determine the future of the United States with regard to global climate change. And it's going to be this time in 2020. So I would suggest that you think in terms of that, and look and find out what kind of things you can do, what's available for you to help do that, get people registered, etc. Okay? That's a good one. Okay. I know people working hard to take notes here so they don't have to look up. Okay.
I wanted to talk about environmental racism and like how, like specifically Native Americans. So I found a few different like instances in from like 2 other tribes where I wanted to relate it back to like Standing Rock and everything. Yeah,
there's what's called environmental justice. There's a whole term they have for it now. And it's in the Environmental Protection Act. There's a whole provision in there about environmental justice. And you can take a look at, it was a kind of a transparent violation of the principles of economic justice in Standing Rock. But it'll harken back to, you're going to run into an interesting thing. I don't want you to get bogged down on it, but the environmental justice provisions were put in there because it was, and I touched on this, I remember in one of the lectures, is that historically the people who build what they call noxious infrastructure, like refuge dumps, reprocessing plants, sewage places, they tend to build those in or near racial minority communities. And not just tend to, but like overwhelmingly, like 86% of the time. And so the administration of Bill Clinton, they issued an executive order prohibiting the placing of noxious infrastructure, more specifically and narrowly, the federal government granting any licenses or permits to build one of these types of facilities in or near a racial minority community. And so that you'll run into that executive order that was in 1997. And you'll run into a series of cases in which it was one of the more shameful exhibitions of simple bias dominating the judicial system, is that what would happen is that the people, in order to enforce that provision, would file a lawsuit in federal court saying that, look, they've just built this pipeline right in our neighborhood. We're a racial minority, and they had 8 other places they could put it, and they put it right here. And then the bad guys on the other side denied your right to have standing because the provision of the executive order didn't give you standing automatically because they did not put it in there. And then when they tried to get the statute amended, or the executive order amended, Bill Clinton was out of office. And you had a Republican administration, and they wouldn't change the executive order. They wouldn't supplement it by putting in the fact that an individual person had standing to raise the question. And then when a Democratic administration got back in, they went ahead and did it. And then the Republican courts were in place, and they said, oh, okay, you have standing, but all it does, if you file the complaint, all it'll do is grant a presumption that them placing it right in the middle of a racial minority community was a violation of the environmental justice standard, but it's a rebuttable presumption. And if, in fact, the bad guys make any argument whatsoever, they can rebut the presumption because they can say, well, it was cheaper here because the land is worth less, or the people are less politically influential and they couldn't stop us, and so it was a straight business decision. I just did this because, and you'll see it goes back and forth like that. So, but I don't want you to get bogged down in that any more than I've already bogged you down. But don't worry, just proceed apace into that area because it's an extraordinarily important one, especially in light of the issue of this manifest destiny and the racial motives of the oil corporations, okay? Because that racist dimension of their expansion of these pipelines is transparent, okay? Okay. So what are you thinking about what you might want to do?
So far, I mean, I plan on talking about establishment of the establishment of unsafe water crisis in the United States. Talking about that and just kind of like analyzing the Clean Water Act 2019 and analyzing the chemical and oil industries.
I better help you out here. Remember that there are numerous justice issues involved in the trajectory of justice. The issue of clean water is one of them. For example, Flint, Michigan, and the poisoning of the water. It's not at all clear what connection that has to global climate change. Okay? Now, it is true, and here's a little better focus that you can have, is that the projected melting of the ice caps through global climate change and the increase in the mean global temperature is projected to eliminate almost a third of all of the fresh water on the planet, which are stored in the polar ice caps and the ice sheets. And the continued global warming is, and it's important to remember that just the melting of the glaciers themselves doesn't change the level of the sea levels, because the icebergs that are on the sea surface displace an amount of seawater underneath them equal to their mass. So it doesn't change the sea. That's not what causes the rise in sea levels. What causes the rise in sea level is either the melting of the ice on land, then cascading into the sea, but most importantly, or more importantly, the exciting of the molecules of water by the increased global mean temperature. It heats up the molecules and they expand. Literally, the ocean waters expand. And that's what causes the inundation of the shorelines. Okay? And that's going to potentially eliminate, and I want you to take a look at it. I won't tell you how much because you're going to find out in your research, but it's going to eliminate another significant percentage of the potential potable water on the planet. because it sinks into the ground, the salt water, and contaminates the underground aquifers. And that it travels inland. It travels under the ground inland in the aquifers to contaminate the water further in. And a thing that, I mean, I'm astonished that I never even thought about it, is it turns out that the global ice caps and the ice sheets, the attendant ice sheets, are the source of the rivers on the planet. And so that in the summer months when some of it melts, it all runs down to the equator from the southern ice caps and northern ice caps, and it's the source of the rivers. And so with the melting of the polar ice caps, the other sources or would-be sources of fresh water, i.e. the major rivers of the world, dry up. Okay? So that your interest in dealing with water is an important one, because this impact on potable water on the planet of global climate change is a critical issue. And I would have been disappointed if I hadn't gotten at least one paper directing your attention directly to the impact on fresh water of global climate change. And it's going to be a really important experience for you to get some in-depth knowledge about that. And okay, so that's how I think you should go at it, rather than just the Clean Water Act and the contamination of water, which is a terrible thing in and of itself, but there's a more direct connection.
And Danny, I just wanted to also mention that Santa Cruz County has a big problem with saltwater intrusion into our aquifers, and particularly like the middle part of the county. So if you are interested in looking at like a local example of that, I would suggest checking out Santa Cruz County, because we have a lot of saltwater intrusion going on. It's going to get worse as
Okay. So those are some of the ideas that are up already in front of us. And so I'd like you to be very creative about it. If you have any doubt at all about the focus of the choice that you're making, just give us a holler. You can contact John or me. You got our emails. Just get a hold of us, and we'll help you precise your topic, because I want these papers, did I say 20 pages? No, okay, but 12 to 15 pages, because I want you to get a second breath in these papers, not just a quickie thing. I want you to be doing some thinking and follow up on some of your thoughts, okay? All right, terrific, kids. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.